So let's say you don't want to use anything from the asset store, you want to create your own objects, or you couldn't find anything in the asset store that you wanted to use. So we'll start easy. Let's see if we can make a crate that would come from a shipwreck or some type of cargo ship. Maybe it fell off or shipwrecked and then the crate came to the shore. So let's go ahead and create in the hierarchy panel 3D object and then cube. And I'll put one in the scene, just rearrange it so it's fairly close to your starting position so you don't have to go find it. And I'm going to put it right in the sand right here. Zoom in on it. Right now we just have a white cube, but let's say we wanted to make it a little bit more realistic. You could import the crate textures or any type of textures you worked with earlier. Or if you haven't done that yet, just go to Google Images. All I did was type in crate texture and I got tons of hits. So find one that you think will work well in your game. I kind of like this one here. So I'm just going to right click on it, save image as, and I'll rename it just so I can know what it is or find it easier. So I'm just going to call it crate texture using camel case. And then I do want to save it in my project folder. So on the desktop, I'll find my Unity project folder, go into my project, go into the assets, and then I'll put it in the textures folder. Save it there. Looks like it's good to go. As soon as I pop Unity back up, it may take a second or two for it to compile that change. I go in my textures folder here, and I now have that crate texture right here. You can create a material before you put it on first, or if you drag the texture onto an object, it'll automatically create the material for you. So a material actually takes the texture and some other different properties, puts it together, and creates a surface on that object. So right now, here's it created a materials folder for me. Here's that material with the crate texture. You can change some of these properties if you want to. If you wanted it to make it a little darker, you can make it a little bit more brown. Okay, so there's all types of things you can do. All right, and there's my crate. To rename an object, you can double click on it slowly, or you can right click and click rename. So I'm just going to call this crate. If you want to duplicate it, the keyboard shortcut's Control D, and it puts a little number after here, or you can just right click on it and duplicate. Does the same thing. It's duplicated, even though you can't tell, but that's because it's over top of one another. As soon as you move these away from one another, you can see that there's more. So that's a simple way of creating crates. But let's say we want a cave. A lot of you guys have been asking about that. You can't use the terrain for that because notice when I move my camera angle here and I go below the terrain, you actually can't see it from the bottom. The terrain is a one-way surface object, so you can only see it from the top, but not the bottom. Same thing with the water, too. You can't see the water under here as well. So what we need to work on is taking multiple objects, putting them together to create some type of cave surface. So what I'm going to do first is create an empty, and this is going to be a parent for all the child rocks, so to speak, that get put together to make the cave. So I'm going to call this object cave. All right, put it down on the ground. And again, it's hard to see this object because there's no mesh or there's nothing to really look at. So it's not really matters where that object is right now. So I'm going to create a bunch of different spheres, capsules, and cylinders. So for right now, I just need a floor for the cave. So I'm going to do a cube. All right, I'm going to use my scale tool, which is the tool right up here in the left, and I'm going to scale this out so I get a floor for my cave. All right, that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and scale it down a little bit in the Y so it looks something like this. Now I need to parent it to my cave object. So I'm going to just drag and drop it onto the cave, and then I'll rename this so I know what piece of the cave it is. It's the floor. Reset its position. There we go. So that's what the floor of my cave is going to look like. And now what I'm going to do is basically that same process, but just start building the walls of my cave. So I'm going to make this relatively quick. So I'm not going to make as many as what it would take to make it look realistic, but you'll get the idea. All right, so this is going to be one boulder or side of my cave. So I'll rescale it here. Okay, so now notice that the sphere collider didn't actually work with the wall. So we'll have to mess with that a little bit later. So I'm just going to take it off for now. And as you create your different objects, if you want the colliders on, you can leave it. So if I hide the mesh renderer for my floor, you can still see that it has a collider. So the player can't go through that box. All right, I'm just going to take this and start to make a cave. All right, I'm going to duplicate these, and these will start to look like stones. Again, you probably want to make these a little smaller and whatnot, but you get the idea. I'll select all of these, hold down Shift or Control to select more than one object at a time, and all I did was right-click and duplicate, so you can duplicate multiple pieces at a time. Going to rotate these. All right, and I'll go ahead and fast forward to where I have this mostly completed. Okay, so I have the base of my cave set up. Right now it just looks like a bunch of white clouds, but we can change all that. The first thing is that I took all of the colliders off of these spheres going around. So in order for them to be solid so the player can't run through them is to select them all. So I'm going to select the top one, hold down Shift and select the bottom one. And I'm going to go to Add Component, Physics, Mesh Collider. As I do that, it doesn't look like anything changed, but for example, if I select this top piece and I hide the mesh, you're now going to see the collider. So that represents a solid object that the player cannot go through. And normally this wouldn't be the best way to do it because the less number of triangles that a collider has, the less memory that it takes up on the CPU or on the computer. So not the most efficient way to do it. Probably want to use some type of third-party modeling tool like Blender, but we're not going to go that far into what we're doing here. So now to get rid of the white texture, similar to how I use the crate texture, you can either use your own rock texture if you want to, but just to save a little bit of time, I'm going to use the terrain textures that we have here from the standard asset. I'm just going to use the cliff. So I'm going to select one sphere at a time, and I'm going to go ahead and add in a cliff texture. So if I look in my materials, inside here now, I now have this cliff texture or this rock texture. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this onto all of my different spheres. There we go. So it's starting to look more like a cliff. At least it doesn't have that white texture on it. And since all of these are children of the cave object that I originally created, now I can just move this to somewhere where I want there to be a cave. And notice that the floor entirely goes away if it's below where the terrain is set up. So having a tree right there probably wouldn't be good. So I can move it back here if I wanted to. And now it still has a dirt floor, but it looks more like a cave. If you want to put it closer to a mountain, you can do that. Okay, and you just got to be careful that you leave an entrance for the player to get in. So for example, something like that. Again, you could add more objects on top of this so it looks more like it's meshed into the mountain than this. Right now this still looks kind of man-made, but you have the idea of how the cave would look. If I playtest this, and run all the way over here, you can now see what the object's going to look like. And you can run in here and then Now's your cave. Notice that I cannot run through any of these objects because I put the collider on them. And they can come out of the cave. To make the rocks a little bit more realistic, I just thought about it. Click on your from a standard, and we can actually give it a normal map. A normal is any type of 2D texture that gives it a more 3D effect. So for example, let me see if I can find one that's a little bit more pebbly. That's pretty good. The only unfortunate part is that it's a little bit too reflective. So you can mess around with these. Right now the more normal map is set to scale of 1. If I decrease the scale, it's going to give a little bit less ripples so it doesn't look as reflective as normal. So now it kind of gives it a more 3D effect, even though it is a flat surface. You can do the same thing again for the height map if you choose. Make it more pronounced or less pronounced with the height. Okay, something to give it a more stone texture effect. Okay, hopefully yours looks a little bit better than that, but you at least get the idea, and now you can hit the ground running on creating your own objects. Okay, you can do that for caves, you can make your own bridges. Okay, go. All right, next we're going to start to create some objects and then code in an objective for the player and this game.